Good morning. We're going to start the condition inspection in earnest today, which means getting tools together, getting the cockpit emptied out, and then start removing access panels, remove the engine cowling, all those things you need to do to inspect the inner workings of the airplane. So first thing first is to protect the wing. I built this airplane when I had the paint job done. I didn't put a wing walk area, which would be that sort of textured black sandy material that goes here. I just want to keep a nice clean wing. So when the interior was made, I had the upholsterer use some of that interior material to make wing masts which match the interior of the airplane, since he already had the stuff and he was doing it. One key trick here is be sure and put your N number on your wing mat, because I guarantee you that one day you'll forget about it at an FBO. You'll start up the engine, fly away, and then you get a call from the FBO that says, hey, did you lose this? So it actually has worked for me. I did it, Punta Gorda one time, I forgot. And they called me up. Actually, I called them and they was like, yeah, we got it. So I went back and picked it up. So I'm gonna show about the inside of the airplane, climbing up, some of the things that go on in here, talk about what I've got in the baggage compartment. So, pardon the inversion. Coming to here, I've got sunshade, so when the airplane's gonna be parked for an extended period, this protects the glare shield from solar damage. I've got my wheel chocks, keep those at all times, come in very handy. Here is 2 quarts of oil and some cleaning supplies, rags, things like that. And here's the tools that I always take with me anywhere I go, and I'll go into some detail on that in a minute. Over on this side, I've got spare headsets. This is for the passenger when I'm flying with 2 people. And then a folding step, so this thing opens up. And it's a big step getting up on the wing, too much for some people, so I'll put that out if the passenger needs assistance getting in. Let's come back out. So now I'm going to grab that toolbox, bring it out here, and I'll show you the kind of things I carry around with me wherever I go. I mentioned earlier that I recently added a transponder antenna on the wingtip. So here's a spare, you can kind of see it in here. It's made from 3D printed plastic, so I don't know how strong it is. I don't know if it's going to snap if somebody leans on it. So having a second one on hand is a good idea. I wasn't entirely sure how well it would work, so this is actually the original belly antenna. So if ATC starts yelling at me or they can't receive me for some reason, it's just 4 screws. I can swap this out with and reinstall it in the belly, as we discussed in the earlier video. Phillips head screwdriver, one with a long shaft. This makes it easier for getting the screws on the bottom of the lower cowl. Ratchet, because this airplane uses light speed ignition, which has 14mm motorcycle spark plugs. So I try to keep the kinds of things on board that a normal mechanic shop wouldn't have. So like an ordinary socket set, there's no need, because anywhere I go, somebody would have that. So this is the spark plug wrench. Here is the removal tool. This is what holds the nose gear door closed when I'm taking the bottom cowling off. This is a spare ignition coil. This is one weak spot on the light speed ignition, which is that if you run the coil with one terminal disconnected on the high voltage side, it can damage the coil internally. So I always keep one of those on hand. These are the cowl removal tools. It really just consists of an Allen key and a female threaded socket for pulling the long hinge pin out. Here's an extension. And then this is a modified socket where I ground down the edge, and this is for removing the spark plug adapter. Since we use motorcycle spark plugs, but the holes are threaded for regular aircraft spark plugs, there's a brass adapter in each of the 12 spark plug holes. So you need this to get that adapter out. Some zip ties just for general use. This is a spark plug gapping gauge. So if you can see, it's got your scale, so you can check your spark plug gaps. Small, doesn't add much weight. Here's a spare fuel cap in case, for some reason, if somebody forgot to restore a fuel cap when it's refueling, and I look out and I'm flying around, I see one missing, I have a spare with me. The second spare is in a cabinet in the hangar over there. What else do I have? Oh, another ignition coil, and some spare spark plugs and adapters. So you can see here, These are Denso. I think there's a Denso. There's also an NGK model that would work. So this is the spark plug, and then you can see the brass adapter and some fresh washers if I ever have an issue with that. Again, this is a non-standard item, so it's not something a regular airplane shop would have if I was on the road when these problems started cropping up. So the next thing I'm going to do is start removing the cowl. So as I mentioned, I'm going to take my tools. I need these. And also, I'm going to need the screwdriver, so I'm going to stick this in my pocket. Coming around the front. Take a look here. You can see there's a quarter turn fastener here and a socket wrench, a socket head screw here. So I'm going to put this guy in here and just unscrew it. Of course, doing it one-handed. You can tell it's done when if you wiggle it and it's got a little bit of free movement in it, like you can see it's moving side to side now. So I'm gonna try, let's see, right about there. Yeah, it's definitely out all the way, so I can take this out. Now this is a female threaded tool, so you can, if you have trouble getting it out, you can thread this on and you got something to pull. And I'm just gonna pull it all the way out. And that's it. So the other thing about prepping your work areas is making sure you have some place to set things after you're done with them. This is especially true for the cowling, which we'll see in a minute. I'm going to use my Phillips head screwdriver to take this screw out. It's a quarter turn fastener, not captive because of the way the cowling slides together. You can't have a socket. You can't leave this poking in. So I'm going to put this over here too so I don't lose it. And I'll put everything in a cup when I'm done here. Same thing on the other side. Quarter turn fastener. And then I have to go retrieve the Allen wrench. Oh, it's in my hand. Done with that. Oops. And these pins were very tight when the airplane first flew, but over time they've settled in, so they're actually quite easy to get out now, once you unscrew them all the way. There we go. Oh, this one's a little tight. There you go. Set that down over here. Done with the Allen wrench. Keep these together so I don't lose them. And then there's a hinge pin in the back, runs along the back edge of the cowl. So I raise this up a little bit. And that takes some of the tension off that hinge pin. Now I can open the access door here. And just pull this guy straight out. Now the cowl is ready to be lifted off. So I'll put this in over here for safekeeping. And what you do is there's hinge loops along here. This is a piano hinge inside. So I'll use my fingernails, not tools, because I don't want to chip the paint. And I'll get under here and I'll lift this side out. And this might require two hands, so bear with me. Here. So that's the top cowl removed. You can see, as I mentioned, here's those piano hinge. And one thing about this is that these hinges, because they're hidden, it's safe to put this cowling down, upside down, resting on the hinges, because a little bit of chipping on this paint won't be visible. In contrast, the upper cowl, the edge that's exposed is directly visible, so I always set it down on something soft. So I had some towels ready before I put it down. So we're going to remove the bottom cowl now. There's two ways to do this. If you have a helper with you, you can undo the bottom fasteners first and then pull the pins here. There's one on each side, right there. Pull those pins out and then you drop it down and forwards to get it out from under the propeller. Since I'm working on my own today, I'll show you how to remove it single-handedly. So you can pull these side pins out now. There's one on each side here. And now the cowl is only attached at the bottom. It's loose here. I'm going to grab this tool, which holds the nose gear door closed, this guy here. And we're going to go under there with the creeper and get started. And for this, I need to bring the screwdriver. So, I'm going to put my leg over here. So if you can see here, this is the bridle that closes the doors. And as it stands now, the bottom cowling over here will not clear the gear doors unless they're in the in position like this. Just going to take this clip, hook it over one side of the bridle. Actually, I'll do the other side first. Sorry about that. And then push these shut, snap that in place. Now the gear doors will stay put. What I do now is try and arrange the camera so I can do this. It's going to require two hands. So you can see that there's 4 fasteners. I should be doing on this that way. Okay. There's 4 quarter-turn fasteners here. Where are they? These guys here. A couple of drain lines. Another fastener. There's 4 on each side and 2 in the front. So I'm going to remove those. These are captive, so I don't need to catch them or store them or anything. They stay with the lower cowl. This is where things get tricky. As soon as I do the last one, the cowling will be ready to drop. I'm gonna move that camera out a little bit. And I put my foot on the front to support it. To the side. And now I can put it straight down. Oh, missed one. This one didn't unseat. Stored safely. So hopefully I captured most of that. I'll have to review the video later to make sure I got good angles on everything. But in the meantime, we can talk about what's in the engine compartment. So I'll start from this side over here. Starting on the firewall, let's talk about the brake reservoir. This is for the brake fluid. This is one of those things that's reversed from the Lancer plans. This airplane has brakes on the pilot and co-pilot sides. So in standard methodology, this goes on the right, and the brake line from here goes down to the master cylinders of the pilot side, then up and over the nose gear tunnel to the co-pilot side, and then out to the brakes. But what that means is when the pilot steps on the brakes, he's got to push fluid through 2 sets of master cylinders, which generally, if you've ever bled brakes and tried to get a good feel, you know that it can be spongy the longer the path and the longer the number of obstacles the brake fluid has to go through. So I decided I'm going to give the pilot the best brake feel. So the pilot's master cylinders and brake pedals are connected directly to the wheels and then over the nose gear tunnel. So the co-pilot gets secondary quality brake feel and then up to the reservoir. Over here is the gasculator. This is from a Cessna, I believe out of a 182. I got it from a salvage yard. As you mentioned earlier, you pull this plunger here, and that'll drain fuel. And the drain line is accessible from outside, which was not in the original Lancer. In the original, the drain was actually right here, and with the cowling on, you couldn't reach it, so you couldn't test your fuel. Back here, here's I'm going to turn the camera. This is a S-Tech, I believe, starter motor. Nice and small, way smaller than the stock Continental starter motor. This is a BNC 20 amp alternator, generally called a standby alternator, but on my airplane, I have a dual alternator, dual battery, dual bus system. So this is actually alternator B. It runs the B side of the electrical system, and if necessary, can run both sides. Talk about over here on the firewall. See if those show up. I've got fusible links, one here, and there's one over here. These are to protect the A and B buses from the alternator. If the alternator ever gets a dead short inside, you could potentially connect your battery straight to ground through the alternator, which would be a very serious problem. So if the alternator were to fail in that way, the fuse would fail here, and then you'd be running on battery power or you can cross tie and keep flying until you get to a place where repairs can be made. Let's see what else over here. Fuel flow sender. This one here, this device is a little paddle wheel. It spins, sends pulses to the fuel computer or the engine monitor system, and tells you your fuel totalizer, fuel consumed, rate of fuel flow, fuel remaining, those kind of calculations. Now you'll notice the fuel comes out of the fuel pump here, through here, and then through the baffles onto the hot side of the engine plenum, and the fuel line comes through here and over to the throttle body, and then from there out to the manifold. Originally, I had my fuel flow sender in here on this portion of the fuel line. So you can see it on this portion of the fuel line. It was located here, but after engine shut down, the heat would just bake the thing and it failed on me, so I just relocated it to the cold side of the engine plenum, and it's been trouble-free ever since. I have a dual light-speed electronic ignition, so you can see the 6 ignition coils here. As I mentioned, I've got a couple of spares. There's 2 spark plug leads per, and if one of these were to become disconnected, either here or over here. One downside to these is that these are snap-on connectors. I just give it a tug and it comes right off. And if this were to come loose due to gravity or vibration, then you would have an open circuit and you could potentially damage or cause one of those coils to fail. If that happens, you'll be running on 11 spark plugs instead of 12. It's a noticeable roughness, but the engine will keep running. You can still get to where you need to go. Over here is the standard 12-volt alternator. So this is, I believe Macaulay makes them now. They're the manufacturer. Hartzell, excuse me. Hartzell makes them now. So this is a 70 amp 12-volt alternator. So this runs the bus A. You can see a nice, I think 10 gauge wire running that. Coming around to the front, this is the ignition pickup for the light speed system. So let's see if I can get an angle on that. There's 2 Hall effect sensors right here. And if I turn the prop, ignition is off, I checked. See if I can find that spot for you. That's a counterweight. And when I keep going around, I'm gonna go another 180 degrees. You'll see here are the trigger magnets. And I'm gonna come around to get a view of that for you. So there's magnets embedded in this aluminum here, and when those go past this Hall effect sensor. So it's a dual ignition pickup. So the wiring comes off, if you can see down here, that's one of the wires, which runs through the engine baffling here and back through the firewall to one of the ignition modules. And then on this side, you can see the other one. So they're physically separated because this is obviously, if one of these were to get cut or fail, you would lose that ignition system. So it's dual ignition, they run physically apart from each other. You notice it goes through the firewall here, and the other one goes through on the other side over there. Coming down to the bottom, we'll talk about some standard Continental things. So we've got your typical cylinder head temperature probe, and the EGT probe is here. So you can see there's a small hole drilled, then it's held on with a hose clamp. All these wires get bundled together and go back to pass through and go to the engine monitor, which is behind the instrument panel. I'm going to talk about the sniffle valve for a minute. Down here, you can see this drain to this copper line here. Let's try and get an angle on it. And what's here, this is a check valve. In Continental engines, because it uses cross-flow head, the intake manifold is on top. And when you prime the engine using these fuel lines, this fuel injector line here, coming down and into the cylinder head back there, right in there. If you overprime the engine, there's a possibility of flooding it or filling the cylinder with gasoline, causing hydraulic lock. So Continental engines are designed with drain tubes on the bottom. So right here is the drain line. There's one for each cylinder. All 6 of these come together into this check valve. So if you overprime the engine, you'll see fuel pour out that drain as opposed to causing damage through hydraulic lock. So that's the sniffle valve, and there's a hole in the bottom cowling, so you got to get that lined up when you get the cowling back on. It is normal if you do a short taxi, you may see some fuel dripping out of there. And also, if you're trying to do a flooded start, you can go to full rich mixture, full throttle, high boost, and have an observer watch that line and have them do like this when you see fuel coming out, and then pull the mixture to idle cutoff, crank the engine, gradually rich in the mixture. And that's one way to get the engine started if you're having, if it's giving you trouble with hot starts. Coming around, propeller back where it belongs. Here's my intake screen. So I decided to run without a filter. This is not an off-field airplane. It's only meant for paved runways. I avoid even taxiing on grass whenever I can. So this engine is not subject to dusty environments. So the engine is doing fairly well. It's a mid-time engine now, over 1,300 hours on it. Oil consumption is gradually creeping up, but other than that, it's running fine, which would be normal for an engine this age. What else? This is all stock here. Here's your fuel distributor manifold, the injection lines, which I mentioned. This is always a problem with Continentals. The injection lines are above the engine, so when you shut off, all the heat rises and boils the fuel in these lines. Makes hot starting difficult. Dipstick. These are MSD ignition wires, which is what Lightspeed recommends, and they do just fine. I replaced them after 500 hours because that's a factory recommendation from Lightspeed, but I don't really see any issues. I haven't had any trouble with these. Coming back, one thing that kind of dominates the back part is the scat tubing. When I was building my airplane, another builder in Connecticut told me that the heat was inadequate, and the Lancer comes stock with 1.5" diameter scat tubing for the heating system. So I upsized everything to 2 inches. I've got a stainless steel heater box here, and the way it works is that some of the cold air from the intake plenum here is fed into the scat here, runs down to the heat muff, gets heated up, and you can see over here, not this one, the one behind it, goes back up into the heater box, and you can probably see this connector here. There's a right angle connector into the heat box. And then on this side, you can probably see the actuator arm, which is here. And that is what opens and closes it. When the heat is on, the hot air is directed into the cabin. When it's off, the air is directed down and dumped overboard through this open vent. So you're always losing a little bit of cooling air if you're not using the heat, but the system works fine. It's more than adequate for, you know, flying at 20,000 feet and the temperature is like -10. So heat works well here. I think that's a good overview of the engine compartment. I think anything else I'll add? Oh, yes, talking about the air oil separator. This is actually the third iteration I've had. My brother's an aerobatic pilot, and so he showed me that on tailwheel aerobatic planes, which tend to dump a lot of oil because of the sloshing the oil does, they will run their drain straight back and let it out just ahead of the tailwheel. So when I initially built the plane, I had, you can kind of see where the blank plate used to be, this black disc right here. I actually ran 3/4 inch aluminum tubing all the way down behind, under the longeron cover under here, all the way through to the back, and I had a drain coming out the tail of the airplane just ahead of the rudder. I thought that'd be a good solution. I said, hey, it's where the tail of the airplane's not going to get dirty. But what happened was that you never know what airflow is doing. So the oil actually ran up the rudder, halfway up the rudder, so the back rudder was always covered in oil, and it was the front of the rudder also got oily too. So I said, okay, that's not a good solution. I found like a home builder's air oil separator, which was actually mounted here, down here, and that one was held on with a strap right about here, and this rubber line went straight down to there, and then it just separated the oil. It would vent into the cabin area, and then there was a drain on the bottom, and anytime you had the cowling off, you could just drain out the oil mist and water and stuff. But that thing did not work well enough for an engine of this size, because this area, because the ventilation coming out, this area would always be covered in oil. The belly would always have oil mist on it. So I finally broke down and got a good one. This one is from Anti-Splat Aero. It's the kind that is engineered to do this. The fuel, the blow-by air comes in at a tangent, swirls. There's separators in here. So the oil is supposed to go to the outside, and then it gets fed back into the engine through this drain line here. And the breather air comes out the bottom, and it's just an open tube like that. So you can see the bottom's a little bit wet, but the belly's actually doing quite well. It's much better than it had been. One interesting challenge here was that Airwolf was for a long time the dominant company in air oil separators, but apparently they got out of that business. So I shopped around, I found the anti-splat, but with Continental engines, there's nowhere to drain the oil back into the engine. So with Lycomings, there's ports and screws on the accessory case. You can tap in multiple places, but there's not an option for that here. So we went back to Airwolf, and on their website, they have a pushrod tube that has a T-fitting built in. So if you can see here, this drain line goes into a T. They added a nipple onto the pushrod housing tube, and that's what gets the oil back into the engine, because under normal operation, the way the valves work is that the pushrod itself is hollow. It brings oil into the socket of the rocker arm, through the rocker arm, distributes it to the valve tip, fills up this cavity, and then drains back through the tube back to the crankcase. So that was lucky, so I just basically tapped into that drain system. That's what Airwolf figured out, so that worked out well. One thing I noticed was that there's something missing here. I did have this valve cover off. I could have sworn I put all the screws back on, but there's one missing. So I noticed that last time I had the cover off, but I didn't have the right screws. This thing is quite clean. There's no oil coming off it, so not something to worry about. I said, okay, next time I have the cowling off. So, as we all know, back to aircraft spruce, and I got the parts. So it's a really oddball screw. It's kind of old school. So these are the screws. One thing I do when ordering with Spruce is if you need one of something, it's probably 10 cents with $5 shipping. So I always order in multiples. And now if I ever lose another one, I have more than enough screws in case I make an oopsie like that. Same thing, they use a split washer. Let's see here. This is kind of old school. You don't see these too much anymore. Usually you have a nylock nut or a metal stop nut. So I said, oh, I'll buy 100 of those. And it was in bags of 100. So I said, give me one. And whoops, I misordered and I only got one. Same thing for the 1/4-inch washer. I meant to get 100. Somehow I only ended up with one. So this right here was $15. So I'll put that on while I'm doing the inspection. And now that's kind of that's a good start. Next thing will be taking all the access panels off, taking out the interior. So I'll get that next time.